At Lokad, the mix between a quantitative approach that builds upon data and a qualitative one that focuses on business decisions has often been seen as somewhat disruptive. As such, today on Lokad TV, we're going to look at this balance and understand which is more important in somewhat of a chicken and egg scenario. So Johannes, our topic today is all about that quantitative-qualitative paradox in supply chains. It's a bit of a mouthful, so what's the idea behind this?
The idea is that, Lokad, we are pioneering something that is referred to as the quantitative supply chain approach. And thus, there are many, people who challenge us, and they say, well, you have a quantitative approach, so how much my company is going to save in dollars 1 year from now if we do that? And the answer is actually very difficult, because you'd say, well, you have an approach where you say, measure everything in dollars and optimize that, and thus, why can't you have a very simple measurement of, the savings right in dollars? And the answer is frequently, well, it turned out that it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And it requires quite a lot of, I would say, qualitative understanding to make any sense of any quantitative figures that we can give. And usually the naked, figures, so if I say, oh, your company is going to save $10 million, yeah, guaranteed, it's usually completely misleading. And so the paradox is that although we have a super highly quantitative methodology with tons of highly numerical tooling, technologies that are literally just doing crunching numbers at scale, doing advanced statistics, so it's highly quantitative. And even, Lokad is a programmatic platform, so literally people are doing programming, which is, again, crunching numbers with a fairly advanced sort of tool, which is a programming language dedicated to the predictive optimization of supply chain. So it's deeply quantitative in the, I would say, in terms of day-to-day operations, in terms of tooling, in terms of tech. And yet, what I'm saying is that usually the only way to make sense of that is to make qualitative judgment, which is a bit of a paradox for, a methodology that kind of prime itself as being highly quantitative.
Okay, people watching this might find that a bit surprising. I mean, you wrote an entire book on the quantitative supply chain. So what is it about a qualitative judgment? What are the sort of things that we should be looking at there? One
of the most important things is to understand that every number, every measurement that you can make is highly subjective. You would think that, we can have something that is completely, rational, objective, where you've like eliminated all sort of like personal judgments. But the reality is that it's nearly impossible to do that. Supply chain are very complex, includes plenty of people, machines, processes, software. It lives inside an ecosystem that you barely comprehend. So at best, you can make judgment call. Even when you want to, to assess things like what is the turnover. There is a great saying in business that says, turnover is vanity, profit is opinion, cash is king. It reflects the fact that depending on what you look at, you're looking at something that is very, very real, or more or less, I would say, more fuzzy, more up to be, I would say, interpreted in different ways. And so look at the interesting, and that's, I would say, the crux of the paradox is that as we were, developing, tools to do, more data crunching, more quantitative analysis, we progressively realized how much depth there was. For example, as we were crunching, this idea of having better and better forecast, and when Lokad started, we had those classic forecasts. So it was like, what is the one number for the demand, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis? And we were producing one number that says, this is it. And so that was our classic perspective, and we realized that we were missing something. You know, there was something that was entirely absent from the whole methodology, and it was uncertainty. Is it a quantitative judgment? It's not. You know, it's from a quantitative perspective, we had the classic forecast, we had certain set of metrics, and they are still valid today. But what we're saying, and that's not a quantitative, you know, statement, but a qualitative one, was that the perspective we had was incorrect because we were kind of dismissing the uncertainty altogether. So you see, it's a judgment call, and thus the thing is that as you go deeper and deeper into the numbers, you see that there is tons of nuance, tons of subtleties at play, and thus you need to, you know, in turn, you improve your numerical analysis. You have tools that are more capable, so you can do more, and then suddenly it opens up tons of doors where you have to make judgment call to say, I want to go this path rather than this path, and it's highly arbitrary.
Okay, yeah, because previously we kind of discussed that great quote by William Edward Deming that basically said, without data, you're just someone else with an opinion. So is what you're saying is that actually without having a bit of a qualitative understanding, then actually there's a limit to what you can do with data?
Not really. What I'm saying is that you can be under the naive impression that the data will kind of reveal itself to you and your company and unlock some kind of business improvement. And I would say, no, not at all. You know, it's as if, you know, you would say there would be like, without data, you're just, you know, somebody without an opinion. You have like naive understanding of that, which is, oh, let, you know, a team of engineers just crunch the data and they will come up with an optimal solution. And that's I would say almost absurdly naive, because you don't even know what optimal mean. I would say there is the more profound, you know, interpretation, which is without data, you are, I would say, you will not even have the tools. You will not have the reality will not even challenge you enough so that you can even build an intellectual model of what optimality really means for your business. And the paradox is that to get the proper ideas on how you should even think about your supply chain, you need to do this data crunching, and then once you've done that, you will make judgment calls that are completely not quantitative. You see, that's the crux. I mean, and the illusion would be that you can bypass a judgment call to just keep it quantitative all the way.
Yeah, it all sounds a little bit abstract, so maybe you could share with us an example here. I mean, what are kind of the qualitative steps that you would take at Lokad?
I mean, just an example would be clients, for example, right now in this period, ask us, oh, tell us, you know, you've just deployed Lokad. We are fortunate. We have still managed to close, you know, clients during the first half of 2020, and they look at the situation. They ask, you know, prove us that we are doing better compared to last year. And obviously, considering the absolutely horrific economic situation we are in, I mean, everything is worse. You know, they have less sales. If they are, I would say, if they are in the fashion business, most of the winter season didn't. I mean, they have left with tons of stock from the winter season. It's quite bad. It's quite dire in many situations, and I believe that even in this situation, we are able to improve things. But compared to what? You know, can we compare the pre-COVID situation to the post-COVID situation? Does it even make sense? How do you compare when you have like retail networks that have closed, you know, a third of their stores? How do you compare when basically the e-commerce has doubled, but the stores have lost half of their demand? It's literally a bit of a different world. It's not entirely different, but it's quite different. And so when it comes to compare the numbers, I would say you need to make judgment calls. You can present the number, you can reason about them, you can try to align them as much as you can. You can try to say, here are all the biases that we try to account for. But the reality is that the numbers that you present, in the end, you need some high-level judgment. You cannot just say, oh, it's just, compare two numbers and be done with it and tell me how many millions of euros or dollars you've saved. For example, what we had to face during this crisis was there was many clients where we had to basically take emergency measures so that they would have, their supply chains would have like a clean shutdown. That was very complicated to orchestrate and completely unprecedented. And then we had to do the reverse thing 2 months afterward, where we had to have like an emergency, I would say, restart of the supply chain. And then, how do you judge, whether Lokad did perform correctly? And I believe that our quantitative approach make it actually reasonably straightforward to make a judgment call. But make no mistakes, there is a judgment, a very educated judgment call involved, and it's completely qualitative. And for example, was for the restart of the supply chain, did we had how many I would say how many panic situations did we have? Did we had suddenly things that were accidental bottlenecks, or on the contrary, did we kind of keep things like smooth and I would say uneventful? The uneventfulness property of your supply chain. It may sound like something that is a typically undervalued, quality of a very good supply chain optimization process is that there is no remarkable event anymore. And it's very hard to have to put, I would say, a numerical, to put that in numbers, when there is nothing remarkable that happened, just because everything is operating smoothly without, much fuss, just as it should. And yet that's a very, very important quality of I would say, of a well-run supply chain. Things are going very smoothly, and there is nothing really remarkable. There is no massive overstock. There is actually as little overstock as you can possibly dream of, and there is very little, stock outs. Again, as little as it kind of makes sense to have. And overall, it's very uneventful.
But do sometimes those clients not get a little bit frustrated because you're focusing on this kind of interpretation of events instead of focusing on kind of the numerical results? I mean, is Lokad not somewhat maybe overstepping their mark there?
Yes, I mean, it's frustrating because it's not easy. You would like to have something that would be like easy, or just give me this number and be done with it. And when you look at the problem and we come back and say, well, we have at least 10 angles to this problem, and we need to balance them, because supply chain is mostly about balancing conflicting economic force, cost of stock, cost of higher production, cost of higher, more flexibility in terms of suppliers, cost of having shorter lead times versus having more stock and longer lead times. I mean, everything, all those things are kind of in conflict. So when we look at this problem and people say, oh, we would like this problem that has at least 10 dimensions to be collapsed to just one number and be done with it, say, well, we know it's frustrating, but you might be missing, the subtlety, and the subtlety is exactly what make, your business great. And it's not always possible to just collapse something that is very, very complex into a simplistic perspective. I'm not saying that, and that's another problem, that you should seek, complexity for the sake of complexity, just to look like, because that's something that there are many actors that in this industry are doing. They are just putting, I would say, an overemphasis on super technical solution with way too many numbers, just to look impressive and to look savant, to look like they know a lot more than you do. That's not our point. Usually we say we have to spend a lot of time on the interpretation to even, for example, qualify whether a number is worth looking at. And that's worth a discussion. Are we, yes, it's always possible for any single dashboard to add one more KPI, but is it really worth it? And again, that's a qualitative discussion about a numerical results. And usually those are and the surprising thing is that whether a KPI is worth looking at depend on the numerical values exhibited by this KPI. And again, how does a KPI, how does the numerical value of a KPI qualify as being surprising? This is again not a numerical statement, but a qualitative statement. And that's where I would say there is this paradox that people think when you say it's only about numbers, they say no, it's about having its numbers with more layers of thinking on top of it.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned kind of previously that idea of those layers of thinking would kind of grow and it would be kind of an iterative process. I mean, for a supply chain practitioner, how often should they be revisiting these decisions? I mean, they can't waste their energy constantly reviewing, are they looking qualitatively at the right things?
I would say, on the contrary, they should be constantly challenging that. And the quantitative review of the system is pointless. That's the opposite. It's when when I see companies who say, "Oh, we are very, very number driven." We have people who manually review our forecast every single week. I say, why do you need to manually review your forecast every single week? That's a complete waste of time. I say, oh, but the forecasts aren't good otherwise. I say, if the forecasts aren't good otherwise, maybe you should fix the forecasting engine that produced those forecasts in the first place so that you don't have to manually fix your forecast all the time and be done with it. And I say, oh, but we have tried for years and we never managed to do that with our vendor. And then I would say, well, pick another vendor, Lokad, for example. But I digress. But back to the thing is that you see this kind of quantitative, this repeat work of doing like quantitative review, I believe it's complete waste of time. On the contrary, revisiting always, the question of what does it mean, what customer demand means, what does it mean? How can I actually better serve my clients? What does it mean to serve them better? Is there an angle that I have not seen? And that's questions that are very worth revisiting all the time. And by the way, I believe that is one of the pillar of the, I would say, Amazon thinking is this idea of day one. If you read the memos that Jeff Bezos gives to the entire world, you would see that one of the key idea is basically one of the tenets of the Amazon way of doing business is it's always day one. So meaning that you should always try to look at the problems as if it was day one, as if you're starting fresh and you think it's day one. How can we revisit from everything that we have done, that has been done, as if it was like the first day we are doing it, so that we can have a completely fresh perspective. And I believe that's the exact opposite of people iterating over their forecast. When they quantitatively tweak their forecast, this is a quantitative perspective where they are going to do the same thing over and over, and it's not the good perspective. The good perspective is something that is much more qualitative, where you revisit and you ask yourself, okay, let's restart from zero. What is a client? Asking yourself those very fundamental questions. And maybe you will converge to the same answer, but if you by any chance converge to a different answer, you might end up realizing that maybe you need a completely different answer. If you revisit what is a client, and then you realize that you didn't have the right mindset about what is a client, then maybe all the solution that you've engineered to better serve what you thought was your client are probably maybe completely off compared to what they should be. And that's a very tricky process, and that's, interestingly, part of the paradox is that usually if you ask yourself those questions in a vacuum, chances are that you will not come up with any new ideas. And part of the paradox is that by looking at the numbers, they can give you the inspiration to get the spark of that gives you, I would say, a better way to look quantitatively at your business. And that's exactly the sort of things that for example, we have managed to do at Lokad with those probabilistic forecasts. When we started looking at those probabilities, we realized there are so many things we had not even realized. We have not even started to scratch the surface on the problem. And we only came to this realization once we started to look at the probabilities, while in the past we were just looking at the forecast, assuming that there is just one number for the future.
Okay, yeah. And previously you kind of spoke about that idea of falling in love with the problem and not just with the solution. So you're saying that by taking more of a qualitative approach, that means it improves the way you kind of approach the problem?
Absolutely. It's, I mean, again, there is nothing more qualitative than a problem definition. You know, it's not the numbers that define the problems. But again, back to the paradox, is that numbers can really help you think better about the problem. Because again, when you have like a problem statement, you need to make choices, you know, and everything is not equally relevant for your company. You know, aesthetics is very important for many brands, and for, let's say, luxury brands, aesthetics would say is everything. If you're selling mining equipment, well, maybe not so much. Does that mean that your equipment can look like crap? No, I would say in a very kind of nerdy mechanical way, mining equipment can actually look pretty cool. But clearly it's not the same emphasis. And you see, so that's why you have a problem statement. You have also to make a statement about what is not relevant to your company. You know, you need to make a parsimony of things that you pick your battles wisely. You know, and again, when you do those numbers analysis extra, they can help you to make the right choice of battle for your company, so that you can have this supply chain optimization that picks the things where you can really have better results. You know, ultimately better dollars. But beware, between the day you start looking at the problem and, you know, the 6 months, 1 year down the road, you will not be looking at the problem the same way, and thus it becomes incredibly difficult to do, you know, dollar to dollar comparison, because it's, I mean, your perspective on the problem has changed.
Okay, if we start sort of maybe concluding today, definitely the difference between this qualitative and quantitative kind of paradox, it's a little bit subtle. So why is it something that is important to kind of discuss?
I believe it's important because I would say, I believe, and we have 10 years of business to support this belief at Lokad, but I believe that quantitative methods bring better results for supply chain. But the crux is that better quantitative methods unlocks new way of thinking about the supply chain, which is something completely qualitative. And you see, and there is this back and forth. You have better numbers, you can think of the problem differently, and thus, I would say, for supply chain directors, I would say get familiar with those numerical methods, just because they will expand your horizon on the way you can even think your supply chain. You know, that's maybe counterintuitive, but it's a back and forth. And go to quantitative methods, not for the numbers, but for the insights. Those methods will open on plenty of other things about your supply chain.
Okay, brilliant. It's been a bit of a mouthful, but I think we made the whole episode without getting the two mixed up. So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.